What if Shedeur Sanders didn't fall in the draft because of his talent, but because of his confidence? What if the real story isn't about football at all? Tonight, we're breaking down the uncomfortable question nobody wants to ask. Did the NFL evaluate the quarterback or react to the spotlight surrounding him? Draft night was supposed to be simple. A talented quarterback with big game experience, elite production, and one of the most recognizable last names in football waiting to hear his name called early. That was the expectation. That was the buildup. But as the picks started rolling in, something felt different. The tone around Shedeur Sanders wasn't about arm talent or pocket presence anymore. It was about fit. It was about questions. It was about things that don't always show up on film. Heading into the draft, the narrative seemed clear. Shedeur had put up numbers. He'd taken hits behind a struggling offensive line. He'd shown toughness, accuracy, and poise in chaotic situations. Analysts debated his ceiling, sure, but very few questioned whether he belonged in the early quarterback conversation. Yet when teams began passing on him, the conversation quietly shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't just about mechanics. It wasn't just about decision-making. It became about personality, about spotlight, about whether the attention surrounding him was too much. Some commentators suggested the media presence and brand power that followed him could complicate a locker room. Others hinted, carefully, that front offices might prefer a quieter prospect. But here where it gets interesting. Teams that desperately needed quarterback help looked elsewhere. Organizations willing to gamble on upside chose different profiles. And as each selection came in, social media exploded. Fans weren't just surprised, they were confused. How does a quarterback with proven production and resilience slide while others with less experience go earlier? Some insiders claimed it was about interviews. Reports suggested certain teams weren't fully convinced by the pre-draft process. Nothing confirmed, nothing concrete, just whispers, and in the NFL, whispers travel fast. Meanwhile, former players and analysts began pushing back. They pointed to his tape, his leadership moments, his ability to extend plays under relentless pressure. They questioned whether the conversation had drifted away from football and into perception. That's when the narrative split in two. On one side, executives emphasizing structure, culture, and long-term stability. On the other, fans and commentators arguing that talent should outweigh everything else. The debate wasn't loud at first, it simmered, but as the draft unfolded, it became impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't just about one player sliding. It was about how quarterbacks are evaluated in today's league, about how branding intersects with scouting, about whether confidence is celebrated or quietly penalized depending on who carries it. And by the time draft night ended, the question wasn't just where Shedeur Sanders was selected. It was why the conversation around him changed so dramatically when it mattered most. But that was only the beginning of the story. When you actually turn on the film, the conversation changes almost immediately. Strip away the headlines, ignore the draft chatter, forget the social media noise. What shows up on tape is a quarterback who stands in against pressure and still delivers accurate throws. Shedeur Sanders wasn't operating behind a dominant offensive line. He was hit, a lot, and yet he kept his eyes downfield. That matters. One of the biggest things that jumps out is his poise. When the pocket starts to collapse, he doesn't instantly bail. He subtly slides. He resets his feet. He keeps his mechanics intact. There are multiple sequences where defenders are closing in, and instead of panicking, he layers a throw over the middle or drops one into tight coverage along the sideline. That's not accidental, that's trained composure. Then there's his accuracy. Short, intermediate, outside the numbers, he consistently puts the ball where only his receiver can make a play. His ball placement on back shoulder throws stands out. So does his touch on fades. He doesn't just complete passes, he throws receivers open. But that wasn't the full picture. The film also shows growth areas. There are snaps where he holds the ball a beat too long, trying to create something instead of taking the check down. At times, he trusts his arm so much that he challenges coverage instead of living for the next down. That confidence is a weapon, but in the NFL, it has to be calibrated. And what happened next caught everyone off guard. When analysts began breaking down his tape more closely, the narrative didn't match the production. His decision-making under pressure graded higher than many expected. His third down efficiency told a story of someone comfortable in high-leverage moments. Even in games where protection broke down repeatedly, he didn't unravel. That's not easy to teach. There's also the leadership element visible between plays. You see him talking to linemen, encouraging receivers, resetting the huddle after a sack. Body language matters on film and has never suggested frustration or blame. It suggested ownership. Some scouts reportedly questioned whether his system inflated his numbers. That's a fair discussion. College schemes can create favorable reads, but the throws themselves, the anticipation, the timing, the arm strength on deep outs, those are individual traits. And that's when the conversation quietly shifted. Because once you focus strictly on what the film shows, it becomes harder to argue he lacks the tools. The tape doesn't scream project. It shows polish, it shows resilience, it shows a quarterback who has already operated in chaos and still found rhythm. The real debate isn't whether he can play. It's how quickly he can translate those traits to Sundays. Money changed the conversation long before a snap was taken. When Shedeur Sanders stepped into the spotlight as one of the faces of the nil era, it wasn't just about football anymore. It was about leverage, visibility, brand power. Reports claimed his nil valuation ranked among the highest in college football, with deals tied to major brands and national campaigns. That alone raised eyebrows across the sport. Because now the quarterback wasn't just a player, he was an enterprise. Some fans believe nil gave him advantages others didn't have. Private trainers, media reach, built-in promotion. And on the surface, it's easy to frame that as privilege, but there's another side to it. Nil also brought pressure most college quarterbacks never experience. Every throw dissected, every loss amplified, every quote turned into debate fuel within minutes. That kind of spotlight changes locker room dynamics. When one player's brand rivals the program itself, tension can quietly build. Not necessarily hostility, but awareness. Teammates notice endorsement deals, opponents notice interviews, analysts notice the marketing push. And whether fair or not, expectations rise beyond football performance. But that wasn't the full picture. The nil era didn't just elevate individual players, it shifted power. For decades, programs held nearly all the leverage. Now elite quarterbacks can influence recruiting classes, media narratives, and even coaching stability. If a star player walks, exposure and revenue can follow him out the door. That's a new reality. Some reports suggested that Shedeur's presence alone boosted national broadcasts and ticket sales. Whether exaggerated or not, the perception matters. It signals that top quarterbacks are no longer just roster pieces. They are assets with measurable market value. And what happened next caught everyone off guard. Instead of shrinking under the financial spotlight, he leaned into it. Confident interviews, polished branding, visible composure. Critics labeled it arrogance. Supporters called it modern leadership. Either way, it forced the football world to confront something uncomfortable. The athlete of today understands business. That's when the conversation quietly shifted. Because the debate stopped being purely about mechanics and decision-making. It became about influence, about control, about whether college football was ready for quarterbacks who operate with professional-level leverage before ever entering the draft. Nil didn't create talent, it revealed power. And the real question isn't whether that shift is fair. It's whether the old system was ever built to handle it. The conversation took a sharper turn when the double standard debates started gaining real traction. When Shedeur Sanders plays with confidence, it's labeled flashy. When he celebrates a big throw, it's called showboating. When he speaks openly about his goals, critics say he's too polished, too aware of the cameras. But when other quarterbacks show that same fire, it's leadership, passion, competitive edge. That contrast didn't go unnoticed. Some fans believe there's a different lens applied to certain players, especially those who arrive with brand power, family legacy, and national attention already attached to their name. Reports claim that media narratives can quietly shape perception long before the first snap of the season. Once a storyline forms, every moment either confirms it or fuels it. And with Shedeur, the storyline was already loaded. Being the son of Deion Sanders meant expectations were sky-high from day one. Every performance wasn't just evaluated, it was compared to hype, compared to draft projections, compared to other rising quarterbacks who didn't have the same spotlight. That kind of scrutiny creates a unique pressure, one most college players never experience. But that wasn't the full picture. When Shedeur struggled in certain games, the criticism felt amplified. Analysts questioned decision-making. Commentators debated whether the media attention was earned or manufactured. Social media reactions turned brutal within minutes. Meanwhile, other quarterbacks across the country had similar stat lines and far less backlash. That's when the double standard conversation really heated up. Some fans argue that the extra attention comes with the territory. If you embrace the spotlight, you inherit the criticism. That's fair, but others believe the tone of the criticism often shifts from performance-based to personal. Confident becomes cocky, strategic branding becomes distraction, nil success becomes entitlement. And what happened next caught everyone off guard. Even during breakout performances, 400-yard games, clutch drives, high-pressure moments, the debate didn't fade. Instead of focusing purely on execution, the narrative kept circling back to hype versus reality. Was he overrated? Was he carrying too much media protection? Or was he simply navigating a modern version of quarterback stardom? That's when the conversation quietly shifted again. Because the more he leaned into confidence, the clearer it became, perception plays as big a role as production. In today's football culture, image and identity are inseparable from performance. Quarterbacks aren't just evaluated by wins and losses, they're judged by demeanor, interviews, and even social media presence. Some reports suggest that this evolving landscape has made it harder for certain players to simply exist without becoming symbols. Symbols of nil, symbols of generational change, symbols of power shifting from institutions to athletes. And that's where the double standard debate becomes bigger than one player. It raises a broader question about how we define leadership. Why is quiet composure praised while visible confidence sparks backlash? Why is brand building applauded for some but criticized for others? In the end, the numbers tell part of the story. But perception often tells the rest. There's one layer to this story that makes everything more complicated, and that's the Deion Sanders factor. Being the son of Deion Sanders isn't just a fun fact, it's a spotlight that never turns off. From the moment Shedeur Sanders stepped onto a college field, he wasn't simply evaluated as a quarterback prospect. He was evaluated as Prime's son, and that changes everything. Every throw gets compared, every celebration gets analyzed, every interview gets dissected. When your father is one of the most charismatic, polarizing, and iconic figures in football history, neutrality disappears. Some people root for you because of the name. Others root against you for the exact same reason. And that tension quietly shaped the narrative around Shedeur from the beginning. When Deion took the head coaching job at University of Colorado Boulder, the spotlight intensified overnight. Colorado football went from relative anonymity to national headline status. Cameras followed practices, press conferences turned into viral moments, every game felt bigger. That environment elevated Shedeur's exposure, but it also amplified the criticism. Some analysts questioned whether he benefited from favoritism. Others suggested the offensive system was designed specifically to boost his numbers. Rumors floated online claiming his development might suffer under a father-coach dynamic. None of it was confirmed, but it didn't need to be. The speculation alone was enough to spark debate. And that's the tricky part. When Shedeur succeeds, critics say he's protected. When he struggles, they say he's exposed. There's rarely a neutral middle ground. The legacy adds weight to both the highs and the lows. But there's another side to this. Playing under your father, especially someone as outspoken and confident as Deion, creates immense pressure. Every mistake feels magnified because it reflects on both of you. Every decision invites second guessing. Some fans believe that dynamic builds mental toughness. Others argue it complicates leadership perception in the locker room. Reports have suggested that navigating respect within a team can be delicate when your head coach is also your parent. Not because teammates lack professionalism, but because perception always lingers. Fair or unfair, questions hover. And what happened next shifted the tone slightly. As the season progressed, Shedeur's poise under pressure became harder to dismiss. He absorbed hits. He kept delivering in tight moments. He handled media scrutiny with calm responses instead of emotional reactions. Slowly, the conversation started evolving from "is he just Prime's son?" to "is he actually built for this level?" That shift wasn't loud, it was gradual. But it mattered. Because the Deion shadow isn't just about pressure, it's about identity. At some point, every legacy athlete faces the same challenge, separating inheritance from individuality. Shedeur isn't trying to erase his father's influence. He's trying to carve out his own lane within it. And that's what makes this chapter compelling. The spotlight may have arrived because of Deion Sanders. The expectations may have been inflated because of the name. But sustaining performance, handling backlash, and maintaining composure under that level of scrutiny, that part belongs to Shedeur. The shadow will always be there. The real question is whether it limits him or sharpens him. There's another layer to this situation that doesn't get talked about loudly, but it lingers in the background. And that's the ownership and optics conversation surrounding Shedeur Sanders and the organization tied to his future. When a franchise makes a major quarterback decision, especially one tied to hype, money, and media attention, fans don't just evaluate the player. They evaluate the people making the call, ownership, front office, power dynamics, and suddenly every move starts to feel political. If we're talking about a team like the Cleveland Browns, that conversation becomes even more intense. This is a franchise that has lived through quarterback turnover for decades. Draft picks, trades, big contracts, rebuilds, resets, repeat. So when a name like Shedeur enters the conversation, whether through draft speculation, rumors, or fan demand, it's not just about talent evaluation, it's about trust. Do fans trust ownership to get it right this time? Because here, what quietly raised eyebrows whenever ownership publicly praises a young quarterback prospect or even hints at long-term vision, it shifts the temperature. It can energize a fan base. It can also create pressure before a single snap is taken. Some fans believe that certain ownership groups are drawn to marketable personalities as much as football traits. That's not a fact, that's perception, but perception drives narratives, and Shedeur brings more than arm talent. He brings brand power, social media presence, cultural relevance. That combination changes optics. And then there's the financial side. Quarterback decisions are no longer just football calls. They're business investments, rookie contracts, fifth-year options, extension windows, franchise tags. One miscalculation can set a franchise back years. So when analysts debate whether a team would prioritize Shedeur over a current starter or another draft option, they're really debating long-term strategy versus short-term stability. But that wasn't the full picture. Because optics don't just affect fans, they affect locker rooms. When ownership appears overly enthusiastic about a potential successor, veterans notice, quarterbacks currently on the roster notice. Even if nothing is official, the energy shifts. Some players embrace competition, others interpret it as a message. And that's where speculation begins. Rumors sometimes suggest that front offices leak interest strategically to build excitement, increase leverage, or apply subtle pressure internally. There's no confirmed evidence of that here, but the NFL world operates in whispers as much as headlines. And what happened next caught people off guard. As media debates intensified, some insiders pushed back. They reminded fans that scouting departments operate independently from ownership hype. They emphasized that pre-draft praise doesn't equal commitment, that a visit doesn't equal a promise. Still, the optics remained. When a high-profile prospect like Shedeur becomes linked to a franchise with a complicated quarterback history, every comment feels loaded. Every sideline reaction is dissected. Even silence becomes a storyline. That's when the conversation quietly shifted. It stopped being just about whether Shedeur is talented enough. It became about whether the organization is stable enough. Because quarterbacks don't develop in a vacuum, they develop inside systems, inside cultures, inside power structures. Some fans believe that if ownership meddles too heavily, development stalls. Others argue that strong ownership backing provides confidence and patience. Both perspectives exist, neither is guaranteed to be right. And that tension is what makes this moment so intriguing. If Shedeur lands in a situation where ownership, coaching, and front office alignment are clear, the narrative becomes simple: build around him and let him grow. If alignment feels fractured, every interception becomes symbolic, every loss becomes evidence for critics. That's the reality of modern NFL quarterback politics. This isn't just about throws, reads, or arm strength. It's about optics, messaging, stability, long-term vision. Because when ownership enters the conversation, expectations double. And once that spotlight turns on, it rarely dims. Here's the part most fans don't realize: in the NFL, narratives don't slowly evolve, they flip. Overnight, one quote, one game, one leak, and suddenly the story changes. Take Shedeur Sanders as the perfect example. For months, the conversation can lean one way: hype, leadership praise, teammates backing him, analysts debating his ceiling. Then one anonymous report drops, one tough preseason outing happens, or one veteran speaks up, and the tone shifts instantly. That's how this league works. A quarterback can be labeled the future in June and a question mark by August, not because his talent changed, but because the narrative did. And what drives those flips? Timing. The NFL calendar is built for speculation. The offseason is loud, training camp is louder, beat reporters need angles, talk shows need debate, social media needs conflict. So when a team like the Cleveland Browns has uncertainty at quarterback, every small development gets magnified. One strong practice, he's taking control of the locker room. One shaky scrimmage, is he really ready? It's rarely balanced, it's momentum-driven. But that wasn't the full picture. Because narrative flips don't just come from performance, they come from comparison. If a rookie flashes in another city, suddenly your rookie is behind. If a veteran restructures a deal elsewhere, suddenly your front office looks hesitant. The league is interconnected and storylines bleed into each other. Sometimes it's not even about football. It's about personality, confidence, media presence. Shedeur has a visible persona, he's composed in interviews, he carries himself with certainty. Some fans see that as leadership, others interpret it as swagger that needs to be earned at the NFL level. That split fuels debate. And once debate begins, narratives accelerate. Analysts start asking sharper questions, former players weigh in, podcast clips go viral. A single comment can spark days of discourse. Even neutral statements get dissected for hidden meaning. If a coach says, "We're evaluating everything," fans hear, "We're not sold yet." And what happened next is usually predictable. The story becomes less about development and more about pressure. If Shedeur throws 2 touchdowns, it's validation. If he throws 1 interception, it's concern. If he smiles on the sideline after a loss, some fans call it confidence. Others call it lack of urgency. Context disappears, emotion takes over. That's when the conversation quietly shifts. It becomes less about patience and more about expectations. The NFL has a short memory when it wants to and a long one when it doesn't. A quarterback can overcome a rough start if the team wins, but if losses pile up, every old critique resurfaces. Draft position debates, arm strength questions, scheme fit concerns, it all comes back. And here's the twist, sometimes the narrative flips in a positive direction just as fast. A dramatic fourth quarter comeback, a signature win in prime time, a viral locker room speech. Suddenly, the concerns turn into growth moments. The same analysts who questioned composure start praising resilience. It's not hypocrisy, it's momentum. Some fans believe media outlets intentionally amplify swings because volatility drives engagement. Others argue it's simply the emotional nature of football culture. Either way, the pattern repeats every season. And quarterbacks feel it the most. They touch the ball every play. They speak to the media every week. They become the face of every win and every loss. So when a player like Shedeur enters a situation layered with expectation, past franchise instability, and passionate fan debate, narrative volatility is almost guaranteed. But here what separates long-term starters from short-term stories. Consistency. If he performs steadily, even through criticism, the narrative eventually stabilizes. If the locker room continues backing him publicly, if coaches remain aligned, if ownership avoids mixed messaging, the noise fades. Because narratives flip quickly, but sustained performance flips them permanently. And that's the part that often gets overlooked. Right now, it's speculation, debate, projection, but once the games start counting, opinions harden around results. The swings get smaller, the story gets clearer. Until then, expect movement, expect headlines, expect sudden shifts in tone. That's the NFL ecosystem. And if history tells us anything, the next narrative turn is always closer than people think. So here's the real question nobody wants to answer too quickly. Is Shedeur Sanders being misjudged, or are people simply misreading the era he's stepping into? Because those are two very different things. On the surface, the debate feels familiar. A young quarterback enters the league with hype. He carries confidence. He draws attention. Some fans embrace it, others hesitate, analysts dissect every throw, social media magnifies every facial expression. We've seen this cycle before. But this situation feels different. Shedeur didn't enter the spotlight quietly. He arrived with expectations already attached. A recognizable name, a proven college resume, a leadership reputation built in high-pressure environments. That kind of visibility doesn't just bring support, it invites scrutiny. And scrutiny in today's NFL doesn't move slowly. It moves at algorithm speed. One clip trends, one quote circulates, one preseason drive becomes evidence for or against a long-term projection. The timeline decides before the season even starts. But that wasn't always how quarterbacks were evaluated. Years ago, young passers were allowed to struggle publicly without it becoming a referendum on their entire identity. Development happened behind the scenes. Growth wasn't debated in real time by thousands of voices. Now, every moment becomes a verdict. So when some fans question whether Shedeur is ready, it raises a deeper issue. Ready compared to what? A rookie standard, a veteran expectation, or a social media timeline that demands instant proof? Because readiness in the NFL has never been simple. Some quarterbacks explode out of the gate and plateau, others stumble early and evolve into franchise cornerstones. The league is full of both examples, that's why quick conclusions can age badly. But here, where things get even more interesting. The modern quarterback isn't just judged on mechanics anymore. He's evaluated on brand, presence, and tone. Confidence can be interpreted as leadership or as arrogance. Composure can be praised or questioned. It depends on who's watching. Some fans believe Shedeur's calm demeanor signals control. Others argue that calm must be backed by production first. Both perspectives exist. Neither is entirely unreasonable. That's the tension of this era. And then there's the team context. The Cleveland Browns haven't exactly had a smooth quarterback history in recent years. Instability creates impatience. Impatience magnifies pressure. Pressure amplifies narratives. When a franchise is searching for stability, every new quarterback carries more than just play-calling responsibilities. He carries hope. He carries fatigue. He carries the weight of past disappointments. That environment shapes perception before a single snap is taken. Some reports suggest internal belief remains strong. Teammates have publicly voiced support. Coaches have emphasized development. But belief inside a building doesn't automatically silence outside doubt. And what happened next will matter more than any offseason debate. Because once regular season lights turn on, evaluation shifts from theory to result. If Shedeur performs steadily, the conversation will evolve. If he delivers in key moments, skepticism will soften. If he struggles, criticism will grow louder. That's not bias, that's football reality. But here's the part people rarely discuss. Sometimes a player isn't misjudged. Sometimes the environment is misread. The NFL today is louder, faster, less patient. Narratives swing dramatically week to week. A quarterback can be praised on Monday and questioned by Thursday. It's volatile. So maybe the bigger question is whether Shedeur is misjudged. Maybe it's whether we're expecting traditional development in a non-traditional era. Quarterbacks now are brands from day one. They arrive with followings, they arrive with cameras, they arrive with debate already built in. That doesn't make them less capable, it just changes how they're perceived. And perception shapes opportunity. If leadership is acknowledged early, confidence grows. If doubt dominates headlines, pressure tightens. Neither guarantees success, but both influence trajectory. Some fans believe he represents a shift, a quarterback comfortable in both football culture and modern visibility. Others argue the league still ultimately rewards one thing above all else: consistent production. They're not wrong. At the end of the day, numbers decide. Wins matter, third down conversions matter, late game composure matters, everything else fades if performance sustains. But perception determines patience. And patience often determines whether a quarterback gets the runway needed to evolve. So as the season approaches, the debate continues. Supporters see leadership and poise, critics see unproven projection, analysts hedge carefully, fans choose sides. The truth, it's probably somewhere in between. Because development isn't linear, confidence isn't arrogance, and early narratives rarely define final outcomes. Maybe Shedeur is being misjudged. Maybe he's simply entering the league at a time when evaluation has never been louder. Or maybe the real story hasn't even started yet. One thing is certain. The conversation won't slow down. And when the first meaningful snap is taken, opinions will start solidifying for better or worse. Until then, the question remains hanging in the air. Is this a quarterback misunderstood, or a league still adjusting to its own evolution? The answer won't come from debate. It'll come from what happens on the field.